Does the Prime Minister now regret raising taxes on business?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the OBR will present their numbers. There will be a spring statement next week.
Speaker, the only black hole is the one that he is digging. He's shown absolutely no regret, but everybody knows the Chancellor has made a mistake. That is why they're having an emergency budget.
She still hasn't. We've got record investment into this country. Interest rates have been cut, and she talks about national insurance. We had to fill the 22 billion black hole that they left.
Did Keir Starmer deliberately mislead Parliament about hospice funding? Today's explosive PMQs revealed a shocking moment when the Prime Minister caught Starmer red-handed, omitting crucial information about government investments while attacking the national insurance changes. The chamber descended into unprecedented uproar as Starmer's carefully constructed jobs tax narrative collapsed under scrutiny. What happened next exposed the dangerous game politicians play with selective facts, and why this particular confrontation matters for every taxpayer wondering where their money actually goes. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great! Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. Starmer's tactical approach in Wednesday's PMQs centered on a calculated emotional trigger.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor claimed that her budget was a once-in-a-Parliament reset. So why are we having an emergency budget next week? Speaker, he knows why we're having an emergency budget, because since the last one, since the Chancellor delivered her budget in October, growth is down, borrowing is up, and she has destroyed business confidence.
Mr. Speaker, we have delivered record investment into this country, had 3 interest rates cut in a row, and wages are going up faster than prices, which is a massive cost of living boost. Massive 22 million black hole in the economy. They crashed the economy. We're rebuilding Britain.
Hospice funding. Rather than launching a broad attack on government policy, he zeroed in on a specific demographic that few politicians would dare to appear callous toward: the terminally ill. His repeated framing of the national insurance increase as a jobs tax wasn't merely semantic wordplay. It was a deliberate attempt to recast a technical fiscal policy into something that sounded predatory. The opposition leader's persistence was notable as he hammered home the same question despite receiving initial responses. Like a prosecutor unwilling to accept evasion, Starmer kept returning to the central question: would hospices be exempt from this increase? His strategy relied on repetition to create the impression that the Prime Minister was dodging rather than answering. What made this line of questioning particularly potent was Starmer's specific reference to St. Helena Hospice in Colchester. By directly quoting their concern that they cannot use this funding for salaries, he transformed abstract policy debate into concrete human impact. This wasn't just about percentages and revenue. It was about the nurses and caregivers tending to those in their final days. The emotional weight of end-of-life care cannot be overstated in political discourse. By positioning hospices as victims of government policy,
later today, Conservatives will vote to exempt hospices, pharmacies, and care providers from her national insurance rise. Will he, at the very least, support exempting these vulnerable services from his jobs tax?
But I understand the Leader of the Opposition is straight talking, so perhaps she can help us with this. Is she going to reverse the next increase? If not, what's the point? She didn't say they're going to reverse the national insurance rises. It's exactly what she wants all the benefits, but they can't say how they're going to pay them.
Starmer was effectively asking the public, is this where you want your government to find its money from those caring for the dying? The implication was clear. A government willing to burden hospices is fundamentally lacking in compassion. Throughout his questioning, Starmer projected an air of righteous confidence. His body language and delivery suggested he believed he had cornered the Prime Minister on unassailable moral ground. The chamber's mood seemed to reflect this, with a growing sense that the government was on the defensive about a deeply uncomfortable topic. Then came the dramatic turning point, when the Prime Minister suddenly accused Starmer of misleading Parliament by deliberately omitting mention of the £100 million investment for hospices. The chamber erupted. The controlled environment of PMQs transformed into a cacophony of shouts and gestures as MPs reacted to the revelation. What had seemed like Starmer's moment of triumph abruptly collapsed into disarray. That £100 million revelation wasn't merely a fact-check, it was a political hand grenade that completely reshuffled the power dynamics in the chamber. The Prime Minister's counter-offensive didn't just address Starmer's claims, it systematically dismantled the entire premise of his attack while exposing a gaping hole in the opposition's strategy. The brilliance of the Prime Minister's maneuver lay in its precision. While acknowledging legitimate concerns about hospice funding, he highlighted the distinction between capital investments for buildings versus operational costs for salaries, a nuance Starmer had conveniently glossed over.
We've made provision for hospices, we've made provisions for charities, but we had to secure the economy.
Mr. Speaker, he hasn't made these provisions. He keeps talking about budget benefits. Unemployment is not a benefit. Businesses closing are not benefits.
But we can't get away with what we were doing in that budget, the root cause, which was fixing the economy they left so badly damaged.
This technical but crucial differentiation revealed the oversimplification in Starmer's emotional appeal, making his line of questioning appear deliberately misleading rather than merely misinformed. Perhaps most damaging was the Prime Minister's characterization of Starmer's approach as relying on prescripted questions, incapable of adapting to the answers provided. This assessment struck at the heart of Starmer's perceived strength as a former prosecutor, his ability to think on his feet and respond to new information. By portraying him as rigidly sticking to prepared talking points despite contradictory evidence, the PM effectively painted Starmer as a politician prioritizing performance over substance. The atmosphere in Parliament transformed dramatically during this exchange. Conservative MPs who had seemed subdued during Starmer's initial questioning suddenly found their voice, pointing and gesturing across the aisle as the Prime Minister laid out specific funding figures. The chamber's energy shifted palpably as the PM challenged Starmer's self-description as a conservative realist, suggesting this label was merely a convenient political posture rather than a reflection of his actual approach to governance. Then came the coup de grace, the invocation of the £22 billion black hole, supposedly left by the previous administration. This wasn't merely a defensive maneuver, but a complete reframing of the moral landscape of the debate. By suggesting that current difficult decisions were necessitated by the opposition's past fiscal irresponsibility, the PM flipped Starmer's narrative on its head. No longer was this about the government's callousness toward vulnerable services, but about responsible stewardship of public finances after years of mismanagement. As specific funding details and broader economic context piled up, Starmer's careful construction crumbled. The parliamentary chamber, usually governed by strict decorum, descended into remarkable disorder as MPs reacted to what many perceived as selective presentation of facts being exposed in real time. What we witness today cuts to the heart of modern political theater. The Prime Minister's accusation about Starmer's prescripted questions reveals a fundamental flaw in parliamentary exchanges: the triumph of narrative over nuance. When politicians cherry-pick facts to craft a compelling story, they sacrifice the complex reality that voters deserve to understand. This exchange matters far beyond Westminster. Every taxpayer who watches their paycheck shrink deserves clarity about where their money goes and how it's allocated. Instead, they get carefully curated half-truths designed to provoke emotion rather than enlightenment. The most revealing aspect of today's confrontation wasn't just the facts themselves, but how quickly the power dynamic shifted once contextual details emerged. It's a stark reminder that in politics, what's left unsaid often matters more than what's actually spoken. The public deserves better than selective presentations that collapse under minimal scrutiny.